In the year 1542, at Hakone Pass, a group of children hung upside down over a blazing fire. The heat was unbearable. Too much for some, whose bodies gave out before the flames did. A group of men stood to the side, watching coldly. One of them signaled that number 6 had perished and ordered him to be discarded. Another scoffed at the lack of talent among this year's batch, calling them dullards with a twisted laugh. Their attention soon shifted to a boy who remained calm despite the fire licking at his body. He was the only one enduring the ordeal. They identified him as number 8. One of the men noted that he alone had survived and remarked on his natural affinity for fire release. The scene shifted to a battle where the same boy faced off against the others. When the fight ended, he was the only one left standing. Watching from the sidelines, a few men were stunned by what they saw. One of them acknowledged that, even at such a young age, the boy had mastered all of the Fuuma ninja arts. An elder declared that the child was destined to become the next leader. The year 1546, during the night battle of Kawagoe, the ground was littered with bodies. Across the blood-stained battlefield, a voice recalled the existence of those who had moved in the shadows of history, individuals born prodigies and molded by relentless, arcane training in assassination. These beings were known as the Kusa, or by other names like Rappa or Kamari. Three ninjas were now before an elder, who praised their recent surprise attack as magnificent. This elder was Hojo Jinan. He announced that his lord was pleased with the overwhelming victory and would reward the Fuuma ninja squad with stipends. He expressed his expectations for their continued success, directing his words specifically to one of the ninjas. The boy lifted his gaze and gave his affirmation. His name was the 5th Fuuma Kotarou, the young boy who had survived the fire and grown into a lethal warrior. Jinan dismissed them, and the ninjas vanished into the shadows. Inside the building, another ninja hanging from the ceiling warned Jinan not to place too much trust in them. He reminded the elder that the Fuuma were unlike other ninja, extraordinary individuals forged through brutal training. The battlefield, he said, was nothing more than a gruesome heap of corpses, unrecognizable in form, shaped by the Fuuma's devastating ninjutsu which surpassed conventional techniques. Jinan chuckled darkly. He claimed there was no need to worry. The Fuuma, after all, followed an ironclad rule: absolute loyalty to the Hojo clan. Anyone who defied it faced death. He described the clan as being shackled to this rule, calling them wretched creatures. To him, they were the perfect tools. In the year 1579, during the Battle of Kasegawa, a general rode across the battlefield shouting for his men to seize the enemy commander's head and make a name for themselves. But his charge came to a sudden halt when he noticed a child standing alone in their path. Perplexed, he ordered the child to be killed. The boy calmly removed his mask, and his technique ignited. With a shout of fire transformation, a massive blast erupted from his body. The fire tore through the air, tearing off the horse's head and engulfing the soldiers in flames. Skin melted from bone as the inferno spread across the battlefield. Hidden underground, other ninjas lay in wait. Their faces emerged through the ground, and then they leapt into the chaos. Landing before the mounted general, their appearance filled him with terror. He recognized them instantly, the Kusa. Confused and frightened, he failed to react in time. Kotarou suddenly appeared behind him, and with a swift motion of his hand, he sliced clean through the man's head, ending him in an instant. Above the battlefield, a hawk circled in the smoke-filled sky. Kotarou looked up at it. His thoughts turned inward. To him, killing was everything. He killed to survive, and he would keep on killing. In the year 1613, Kotarou, now 80 years old, was brought forward in shackles. The once feared ninja, towering and broad, was led through a village as the people gathered to catch a glimpse of the legendary figure. Whispers spread among the crowd, some in awe, others in fear. One man marveled at Kotarou's sheer size, stunned by his presence. Another recoiled, declaring him a monster. A woman nearby simply muttered the word, demon. As if in warning, Kotarou had been captured by the Edo shogunate. The Hojo clan, whom the Fuuma had served loyally, had long since fallen, defeated by Toyotomi Hideyoshi during the siege of Odawara. Their hidden village had also been destroyed, leaving no sanctuary or legacy behind. Kotarou was forced to kneel, preparing to face execution. A man stepped forward, asking if he had any final words. Kotarou offered none. Inwardly, he accepted the moment, knowing this was his end. The man carrying out the execution remarked that even a legend like Kotarou could not overcome sheer numbers. He noted that the Kusa of Higa and Koga still seemed to serve a purpose. But when Kotarou fixed his gaze on him, the man froze, seized by a primal fear. As the moment of death drew near, Kotarou's thoughts drifted inward. A chuckle echoed in his mind, bitter and accepting. He reflected on his aged body and the fate that had found him. He questioned why he had lived so long, when he had never feared death. He wondered if Master Kite still lived, still watching from afar. And if he did, would he watch over him even now? He envied the freedom Kite had once embodied. Kotarou longed for that same freedom. Since childhood, he had dreamt of it. An unattainable thing he continued to chase even into old age. He had lived for that dream right up to this final breath. The blade fell. Kotarou's head dropped to the ground. But then, as the world faded, his eyes suddenly widened. A red finger appeared, pointing directly at his severed head. Kotarou was stunned, unable to comprehend the surreal sight. A mystical hand hovered before him. A voice, calm, eternal, chose him. From beyond a dark gate, a flaming figure emerged, claiming to see the world through all things. Kotarou's gaze locked onto the flame within the gate. The voice declared that he would live again. A flash of light pierced the air. The scene shifted. A baby struggled, its eyelids heavy, its lungs screaming for air. It cried out in agony within its thoughts, desperate, suffocating. And then instinct took over. The child unleashed a technique, fire transformation. A powerful explosion erupted as the infant blasted its way out from within the body of a dragon, tearing through the creature's flesh. Floating in the air, the newborn's eyes took in the strange and mystical world around it. Below, the dragon's body crashed down with tremendous force, smashing into a castle and reducing it to rubble. As the dust cleared, the baby slowly rose to its feet. It looked up. Strange creatures emerged, green-skinned with sharp teeth and pointed ears. Demons, perhaps. Kotarou, now reborn, recognized the strangeness of this place. He lay on his back, staring into a sky that felt both foreign and vast. His thoughts became clear. The land was unfamiliar. There were flying lizards in the skies. And with that understanding came clarity. This was reincarnation. After Kotarou blasted through the dragon, someone was watching from below. As she looked up, her eyes widened in surprise when she saw a baby falling from the sky. At the same time, Kotarou was filled with joy. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever felt. He embraced the moment, declaring within himself that he had been reborn, overcome by a refreshing sense of liberation. From that moment on, he felt truly free. Nearly 100 years earlier, the hero Arslad had defeated the Demon Lord. He and his companions were celebrated as the 4 great heroes and became living legends. But with the rise of a new Demon Lord, the strength of the Demonkin surged. Much of the surface world had become part of the demon realm, signaling the dawn of a new age, an era ruled by the Demonkin. In the present, a massive green creature stood over Kotarou, its enormous foot pinning him to the ground. As it looked down, it noticed the infant beneath its foot and questioned what it was seeing. A human child, having fallen alongside the dragon, it made no sense. The creature was a member of the Goblinkin, the King Goblin. Scoffing at the sight, the King Goblin dismissed Kotarou as nothing more than a weak, inferior member of the humankin. With a sneer, he kicked Kotarou across the ground, sending the baby skidding until he landed on his back. Nearby, chaos had broken out among the goblins. One shouted to the king goblin that the Sky Goblin Castle was completely destroyed. Another cursed their misfortune, calling the wreckage of their home unforgivable. Fueled by anger, the king goblin suggested they kill the child to blow off some steam, and the other goblins enthusiastically agreed. With bloodlust rising, they prepared for a messy execution. The king goblin raised his weapon and brought it down with full force toward Kotarou, smashing it into the earth. The goblins erupted in celebration, cheering the king goblin's critical hit with manic delight. But as the dust cleared, the king goblin's eyes narrowed. Kotarou had somehow dodged the blow. Internally, Kotarou was relieved to have narrowly avoided the strike. The goblins couldn't believe what they had just seen. The baby had dodged. As Kotarou observed his body, he thought that babies had underdeveloped bones which made it hard to move. Despite struggling, Kotarou forced himself to his feet. His body trembled, but he managed to stand. The Goblin King stared in shock as Kotarou suddenly vanished. Kotarou reappeared on top of the King Goblin's head, twisting its neck in a grotesque, unnatural motion. Without hesitation, he activated a technique ninjutsu borrowed fire. Flames erupted around him and the Goblin King, engulfing them both. The Goblin King screamed as the fire tore into his flesh, but Kotarou held on, refusing to stop the flow of flames. The goblins could only watch in stunned silence. One of them stared in disbelief, trying to comprehend how a baby could wield such high-level magic. This wasn't just an advanced fire spell, it was something even greater. Meanwhile, the massive corpse of the dragon lay across the sky castle. Steps leading to the ruined structure stretched upward, and the woman from earlier was climbing them. As she ascended, memories stirred within her. This place had once belonged to the Elfkin. The sight brought a sense of nostalgia. Her thoughts returned to the baby, the one that had burst out of the dragon's belly. She was certain he was here. As she reached the upper level and looked around, she was met with a grisly sight. The bodies of goblins were strewn across the floor, torn apart in brutal fashion. Shocked, her eyes fell upon Kotarou, who fell to the ground, exhausted and spent from the battle. She slowly approached him, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. Could this baby truly have done all of this? Pulling back her hood, her expression shifted from disbelief to quiet recognition. She whispered to herself that she had finally found it, a tiny seed of hope. This woman was Hyrie Titania, one of the legendary 4 great heroes. A memory flickered into Kotarou's mind. He saw himself cradled in his mother's arms, his father beside her, smiling warmly. Confusion filled him as he tried to grasp the vision. The image of his birthplace emerged. His village, once hidden, now completely wiped out, its ashes smoldering. The scorched remains whispered of a massacre, the only sign of life being a single infant who had miraculously survived the inferno. The ones responsible for the destruction had remarked on the miracle or perhaps the will of a ninja. As the memory continued, Kotarou's voice echoed in his own mind. He questioned if these were truly his memories. Since the moment he was taken to the ninja village, he had lived under the belief that he had no parents, that the only one he could rely on was himself. Now, he wondered why such a memory would surface. His consciousness stirred, and slowly his eyes opened. Looking up, he saw a beautiful, well-endowed woman gazing down at him. The realization struck him. He had been reincarnated as a baby. His thoughts reeled as he tried to make sense of her presence. Was she a resident of this strange new world? The woman gently wrapped him in her cloak and laid him down on a rock before kneeling in front of him. She introduced herself as Hyrie Titania and greeted him by name. The use of his name startled him. He wondered how she could possibly know it. She then confessed, apologizing for having looked into his memories without his permission. His mind raced. It was impossible. How could someone access memories sealed so deeply? What kind of technique had she used? With a soft tone, Hyrie asked if he would allow her to stay by his side. She acknowledged the limitations of his infant body and offered her help, assuring him she'd be happy to support him in any way. Kotarou regarded her silently. He questioned her true intentions. Help, she said? What was her objective? But in the end, he decided it didn't matter. If she tried anything foolish, he would kill her without hesitation. In this unfamiliar world, trapped in a baby's body, he would use whatever resources were available. With that thought, he flashed her a cute smile. Hairi was overwhelmed by his expression and ran to embrace him, her arms wrapping tightly around his small body. Overcome with emotion, she promised to do her best to be helpful. Her happiness burst forth, but the embrace planted Kotarou's face directly into her chest, turning his cheeks red. She quickly apologized, explaining that she was simply overjoyed and found Kotarou's smile too adorable to resist. Even through the warmth of the moment, Kotarou's thoughts remained guarded. He questioned whether this woman was trying to deceive him, yet he could sense no bloodlust from her. It defied everything he'd come to expect from people. How could someone like her even exist? But he dismissed the thought. No, the only person he could truly trust was himself. Kindness, it was a weakness, a dulling of the senses. That was exactly what they wanted, to tame him, break him, turn him into their obedient dog. That mindset, that poison, was their weapon. In this life, he wouldn't suppress who he was. Not anymore. As long as his heart remained chained, he would never grasp true freedom. And so, as his thoughts faded, he drifted into sleep. Hairi, watching him closely, whispered softly that he had overexerted himself. Kotarou could barely fight the sleep overtaking him. He admitted to himself that it was partly because of his baby body, but ever since arriving in this world, he had felt an unfamiliar comfort. He wondered how long it had been since he'd felt so at ease while sleeping. The constant killing intent that had once surrounded him was now gone. As he lay in Hairi's lap, she looked down at him tenderly. She whispered that he was no longer alone in this world, that she was by his side. A flash from the past then revealed how Hairi had first found him. She had reached the Sky Castle and come upon the aftermath of a brutal battle. Goblin corpses lay scattered, victims of Kotarou's hand. Stunned by the carnage, she questioned who had done this. Then she cast a memory-reading spell. Placing a finger on his head, the spell activated, and Kotarou's memories flowed into her. She saw everything. His life as a child raised among ninjas, the cold glares filled with killing intent as he slept. But even then, Kotarou wasn't caught off guard. She watched him eliminate the assassins one by one. The memory of his execution followed, then his fierce battle against the Goblin King. After killing all the goblins, he sat alone on the floor, a dark, menacing look on his face. Everything he had endured, every struggle, every betrayal, unfolded before her. And as those memories washed over her, Hairi was brought to tears. Hairi held Kotarou gently in her arms, her thoughts stirring deeply within. To suppress one's emotions for an entire lifetime, such a terrifying fate. That was the way of the ninja. One misstep, and they could be consumed by the demonkin. Yet within this child's heart, she saw a glimmer of light. No matter how lonely he was, he never lost hope. His heart had not surrendered to despair. It was the heart of a hero. In this life, she wished for him to know love. He was no longer alone. As she sat quietly on a rock, the Goblin King began to rise again. His body was mauled, limbs twisted and broken, yet he staggered back up. Disbelief twisted across his face as he struggled to accept the reality that a human baby had done this to him, that he, the mighty Goblin King, had been brought this low. Fury surged within him as he prepared to attack again. But just then, Kotarou stirred awake in Hairi's arms. His eyes snapped open, fixing the Goblin King with a sharp, piercing glare. Without hesitation, Kotarou raised a hand, and in a single, effortless motion, he obliterated the Goblin King entirely. Hairi sat still, unaware of what had just transpired. She continued to cradle Kotarou, who had already drifted back to sleep. Time passed in silence until she noticed something flying in the air above. The creature locked eyes with her. In response, she immediately cast a spell Air Rend and brought the creature down from the sky. As it plummeted, She swiftly grabbed her cloak and threw it on. Panic flickered across her face as she processed what had just happened. Had they been detected by the demonkin? The quickest way out of the demon realm was through the former forest of the giant tree. But there was no other option now. She had to go through the great rotwood forest. Elsewhere, an image of Hyrie was being projected through magic. A voice echoed in a dark chamber, reporting directly to the demon lord. The voice belonged to one of 10 shadowy figures gathered in the pitch-black room, centered around a massive, mystical eye. The report was simple. Hyrie Titania, the Fairy King, had been located. A soft, amused response came from the demon lord. One of the other figures chuckled, expressing surprise that she was still alive. Another scoffed, calling it a pointless report. Others agreed, claiming she had lost her former power. The image shifted to reveal the baby in her arms. What truly concerned them now was the child. As the scene played, showing Kotarou battling the Goblin King and tearing through other goblins with brutal ease, the room grew still with interest. Someone questioned whether the child could truly be just a baby. Another simply giggled. Then the demon lord gave his command. 10 demons were to kidnap the baby and kill the elf. The 10 figures responded in unison, accepting the order. A massive explosion shattered the forest as the scene shifted once again. Hyrie was running through dense woods, being relentlessly pursued by demons. She cursed under her breath. There were too many of them. In her arms, Kotarou's eyes were wide with excitement. The enormous creatures chasing them filled him with awe and curiosity. Hyrie urged him not to get too excited. If he fell now, they'd have no chance. They were outnumbered. The only option was to run. Suddenly, creatures descended from above, catching her by surprise. Without missing a beat, she cast the Grand Air Rupture spell, obliterating them midair. Kotarou watched from the safety of her arms, thoroughly impressed. He had never seen a ninjutsu like that before. This girl was quite skilled. But before he could finish the thought, a massive creature swooped down from above, threatening to strike. Fear overtook Hyrie's expression as she looked up, realizing the danger was far from over. Panic was written all over Hyrie's face as she clutched Kotarou tightly. She silently cursed herself, longing for the strength she once had. In stark contrast, Kotarou wore an excited expression as the monstrous creature lunged toward them. But before it could reach them, several small, winged, fairy-like beings appeared in the air, positioning themselves between the monster and the pair. One of the tiny creatures floated up to the beast, confronting it with a claim. It insisted the prey was theirs. The creature abruptly froze, then retreated in fear, vanishing into the distance. Kotarou's eyes widened in surprise as he looked up at the strange new arrivals. One of the fairy-like beings swiftly turned its attention to them and flew closer. Its cheerful form suddenly twisted, revealing a demonic face filled with disdain as it accused them of trespassing and called Hyrie a filthy elfkin. Fury surged through it as it prepared to attack. Hyrie looked up at the creatures cautiously, her thoughts steady and resolute. She knew deep down this was a path she could no longer avoid. Kotarou, meanwhile, looked at the fairies with bright, gleaming eyes, fascinated by their strangeness. The fairies began shouting at them, voices filled with hatred. They called Hyrie an irritating elfkin and demanded she hand over the baby so they could devour her. But before they could act, Kotarou suddenly launched forward, slipping his fingers between the thighs of the startled fairies. Their faces flushed red with embarrassment as they screamed in shock. One cried out in confusion, another in horror, calling him a pervert. Hyrie gasped when she realized Kotarou had vanished from her arms. She tried to warn him, these were no ordinary beings. They were vicious creatures, and provoking them was incredibly dangerous. But Kotarou, still smiling, called out in excitement, fascinated by the flying inchling creatures. As Hyrie looked at him, something swelled in her heart. That pure, innocent smile. Seeing it made her truly happy. She was overwhelmed with joy that Kotarou had finally been freed from the lonely life he once endured. One of the fairies seethed with anger, calling Kotarou a ridiculous brat and threatening to paralyze him. A green thorn began forming in its mouth. The fairy fired it toward Kotarou, and Hairi recognized it instantly. Poison needles. The rest of the fairies followed suit, launching more thorns his way. But Kotarou reacted in the blink of an eye. He caught the incoming thorns using both his hands and feet, halting the attack entirely. The fairies froze in panic as he met their gaze with a menacing glare. Without hesitation, he hurled the thorns back at them. They struck their targets, piercing the fairies' bodies. Screams of pain echoed through the air before they collapsed to the ground. Defeated. One of the dying fairies, disbelief in her fading voice, muttered that those movements weren't human at all. Kotarou landed calmly, the rush of battle fading from his face. His thoughts were cold and sharp. He couldn't help but react when faced with killing intent. It always managed to ruin his good mood. Then, as if the battle had taken nothing from him, he simply thought to himself how sleepy he was. Suddenly, a massive thorn shot toward him. But before it could strike, Hairi snatched him up and fled. As she ran, blood poured from a fresh wound. She had been struck while protecting him. Kotarou looked up at her, his eyes wide as the reality sank in. Hairi stumbled and collapsed to the ground, trembling as blood gushed from her injury. She clenched her teeth, cursing the fact that the thorn had grazed her. Laughter echoed from one of the fairies lying on the ground, her voice weak but mocking. A large creature began approaching from the distance. The fairy announced its arrival. It was their mama. A towering, more sinister fairy-like being appeared. Its presence cast a shadow over the wounded Hairi. In a voice heavy with recognition and mockery, the creature addressed her directly, calling her by name. Hairi looked up in stunned disbelief. It was Elva. Elva, the fairy king, demanded that Hairi hand over the baby. Her eyes burned with ambition as she declared that, after killing Hairi, she would finally be recognized as one of the 10 demons. The words struck Hairi with disbelief. The idea that Elva would join the demonkin was almost too much to comprehend. Before she could say more, Elva silenced her with a roar. With a grotesque motion, she began pulling a weapon out from deep within her throat. How it was hidden there was a mystery in itself. I think we should call her the Throat Queen instead. As the weapon slid free, she made her stance clear. She would no longer follow orders from the Elfkin. After extracting her weapon, Elva launched a sudden attack. Hairi barely managed to dodge as the blast tore through the forest, obliterating a tree behind her. Elva noted Hairi's resilience with a mocking tone, explaining that her venom attack was so concentrated it could corrode and melt anything. She promised the next blow would finish her off. Landing on the ground, Hairi's resolve flared. She vowed never to hand Kotarou over. Kotarou, still cradled in her arms, looked up at her with wide, dazed eyes. Without hesitation, Elva unleashed her next move, Fairy King's Grand Sword Dance. A massive explosion erupted, devastating the surrounding area. But just before the destruction could reach Hairi, Kotarou raised a single finger and stopped the attack in its tracks. A strange feeling washed over Kotarou. In his thoughts, he admitted to himself that he couldn't abandon this girl. Face to face now, Elva stared at him in shock. The baby had stopped her sword strike with one finger. It all began to make sense. Now she understood why the demonkin were after him. He wasn't an ordinary baby. Kotarou, meanwhile, lamented the limitations of his body. It lacked stamina, but for a technique of that level, he could manage. With that, he launched his own counterattack, ninjutsu Finger Sever. The technique cut through Elva's body effortlessly. Blood spewed from her mouth as she staggered back, stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Before Kotarou could finish her, Hairi stepped in, pleading for him to wait. She asked him not to kill Elva. Elva, still trying to hold herself together, questioned Hairi's actions. Hairi answered with conviction. She wanted to save her. Kotarou looked up at Hairi as she began recounting the past. Once upon a time, the Elfkin and the Fairykin lived together in peace within the forest. It had been a bountiful land known as the Forest of the Giant Tree. The Elf King and Fairy King had formed an alliance. Elfkin governed with wisdom, while Fairykin, with their strength and numbers, defended their shared home. But that alliance had a darker truth. The Fairykin were used by the Elfkin, seen as inferior in civilization and intelligence. Over time, resentment and hatred grew. War broke out between the two races. Hyri had been young then, powerless to do anything. Kotarou, remembering his previous life, mused that it was the same in every world, those who used and those who were used. And now, here was a girl with such spirited conviction, even at her young age. When Hyri revealed that this war had happened only 150 years ago, Kotarou was taken aback. Was this girl older than him? What kind of world was this? Elva, meanwhile, dismissed Hyri's words. She called the story an old tale that rotted the ears. As she spoke, she transformed. The poison, she said, should have already coursed through Hyri's body. She was ready to kill her, ready to ease the regrets of the Fairykin by ending the life of a princess. Hyri tried desperately to stop her, crying out that this conflict was meaningless and would only lead to destruction. But Elva would not be swayed. She screamed that this was her mission. Once, during the war, she too had been a princess. That they, two surviving princesses, should meet again like this was fate. She had to kill Hyri to fulfill that destiny. With a flash, the magic rune around her neck activated. Hyri recognized it instantly. It was a contract seal. She was horrified. Elva had made a pact. Elva confirmed it. They were in the same position, so Hyri should understand. The power flowing through her now had been bestowed by the Demon Lord.